So Shad, I thought maybe we could begin with how you got started on the investing journey.
Well, my father was in the advertising business for most of his life, and he recommended to me that I buy some Central Airlines with some money I made in the summer in a construction job. So I bought 200 shares of Central Airlines at $2.25 for $450. And I met the chief executive officer, whose name was Lamar Muse. And they came over to my parents' house one time and had dinner, and my mother's dog bit his wife on the nose. But they didn't leave, but anyway, it showed he was a good sport and resilient. So that was something kind of funny. And anyway, the stock went up. It was acquired about a year and a half later by Central Airlines, by Frontier Airlines for $14 this year. So $2.25 turned into $14 pretty quickly. And I just thought this beats sitting out in the sun carrying forms around. And I was hooked for life, and that was a good success to start with. I had a lot of failures after that, but kind of figured it all out eventually. Maybe I have. I don't know. We'll see.
So did you start investing right away, or?
Well, I'd hear something, I'd buy a stock, and just hearing something and buying a stock isn't a very good investment system, because you hear it from people that don't know what they're talking about. But it took a while to figure out who did know what they're talking about and who didn't. But I was always fascinated by it and always interested in it. And I kid around about myself, but my wife took me to this event every year called Art About Town. And you would bid on paintings, and I would bid on paintings for less than I figured the frame value was.
Less than the frame value?
Less than the frame value. So I was a value investor, and so people would say, well, did you make money doing it? I said, no, I never recognized a penny. They're all horrible. But at least I had some cheap frames.
Wow. So Shad, I think somewhere in the mid-'70s you also started a banking or a brokerage operation, right?
I worked for this firm called Snyder, Burnett & Hickman, and I was a syndicate manager. I did the new issues. I'd allocate the new issues and try to get the firm into the deals. And then I left there and wanted to start my own firm, which I call Rowe and Company Inc., investment banker slash brokers. Really, we were just a brokerage firm and did a little investment banking, but not much. And then I did that and traded for the firm's account and made a little money. And then in 1985, decided to start a fund to share the joys of short selling, which I was doing a lot of, because the skyline in Dallas was just pure cranes, like it is here now. But there were see-through buildings everywhere, and I figured something bad was going to happen, and so I started short selling.
Were you short selling stocks or real estate?
Well, stocks, bank stocks, real estate related stocks.
What was the thesis there?
The thesis was that it was terribly overbuilt and that everybody was going to go broke, which I was absolutely right on. And they did, and so I wouldn't say that was fun, but it was good to be right. But in fact, if I'd saved my money and waited until things really broke down, I could have made some great buys. And it just shows that every dark cloud has a silver lining kind of deal. So I could have done, it's just a matter of which side you're looking at it.
Do you think getting the timing right was important with short selling?
Oh, of course it was, sure. And what I found though was that if you buy a stock and it goes down, the most you lose is the money that you put up. And as it goes down with some more, you have a smaller problem and you don't worry about it. But if you short a stock, it goes up, you're just sick. You can't even breathe because you can have unlimited loss potential. I mean, you can die and be incapacitated and lose every dime you have. There's an overpriced stock service I took for a while, in the 80s, and they recommended shorting Microsoft. And they said, every couple of months they'd say, hold for a better exit point. Well, hell, they lost all their money. So it's not a good solid business. And when I was doing it, interest rates were high, real rates were high, and broker's call was about where the prime was. So if you put up treasury bills and then shorted stock, you get the broker's call on the short position, which would mean that you'd be up 15% when you started, which was pretty good. And now, of course, you have to pay to borrow them, so you're down when you start. So there's a big difference there. I didn't figure that out until later, but that's why it was attractive.
And taxes also were...
Oh, taxes were also the same. They're the same taxes on dividends and interest and short sales and short swing profits and long-term profits, everything was taxed the same. So it didn't matter, and so that was another little added factor.
Right.
Plus, you really never had to cover. You could take the money and pair the trades off. Cover it versus the box, which would mean you'd buy it back, hold a long position, a short position, all at 25 cents a share or something. You never have to pay taxes.
Could you explain that a little bit, Shad, for us?
Sure, you could. If you shorted versus a box or the box of stock, you would borrow the shares that you bought
Sure.
and deliver them against your short position or hold them against your short position. So you would have covered, but not covered, but everything would be blocked out. You could just keep the tax money. And that was outlawed in the tax reform of 1985, but that made a little bit better business then.
So you were getting paid to borrow, the taxes were favorable,
Yeah.
and the market was not fairly valued according to you.
No, and there's a lot more retail investing then than there was
Right.
the last few years. So not as smart.
So why did you give up short selling?
Well, it becomes all-consuming. You think you'd feel better about it as you get older, but it hurts worse. And my mother kind of typically, was always trying to be optimistic about things. And she said, "Shaddy, don't worry. I'm sure something terrible will happen." And I didn't feel any better, but that was sort of the idea. You're looking for bad outcomes all the time, which it's a happier life if you're looking for good outcomes.
Right. And so after you gave up short selling, you moved on to finding small local companies in Texas. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Well, actually, in the time that between Central Airlines, I also owned small companies. I owned Southwest Airlines when they had 3 and then 4 airplanes. So I knew something about the airline business. I knew something about advertising business a little bit because of my father, and so I was sort of set up to own some things on those lines. And I find that one kind of door leads to another, and everything's kind of connected. We're all connected, and so between my father and I'm much more friendly toward now than I was when he was alive, unfortunately. But you could kind of get a feel for different businesses. So and the shorts would eventually turn into longs. I bought back. I owned a short WPP group in 1991, and then covered 92 and covered 91, and then ended up buying it and made a lot on it. And then Southwest Airlines I did very well on.
So when did you buy your first shares of Southwest Airlines?
About 1974.
1974.
That's the bottom of the market. I still have some.
You still have the same shares?
No, I don't have the same shares. I sold most of it, but the stub is very valuable.
Wow. Would you know how much the revenues have compounded by, or the stock price has compounded by since you bought it?
I was probably 27%. It was huge.
20% over 30 plus
Yeah,
years.
it's amazing what it does.
What was it about Southwest that got your attention?
Well, Lamar Muse, he's the same guy that was the head of Central Airlines.
Right.
And so I felt like I knew him, and it was obvious to me that they were doing something better, faster, cheaper. They were flying between Dallas and San Antonio and Houston on a tight schedule and doing it for not much more than the price of a bus ticket. So the traffic was expanding. They were stimulating the market, and it was growing. And they did that everywhere they went, all over the United States. And now they've gone abroad. And it's a better story. They have one airplane that they fly. Is threw an engine out. It was on the news today, but it was just a once in a lifetime kind of deal. And to do it in an airline is very unusual because it's only really it never has shown loss in all these years. The other airlines went broke all the time, but they didn't put their customers first. They put themselves first.
And their employees too.
They treat everybody well.
Very well, yeah. So around 15 years ago, maybe, or a little older than that, you changed your outlook again, focusing on companies that can scale, do things faster, better, cheaper for the customers.
Yeah.
How did this change happen? And maybe give us some examples.
Well, it's part of a, kind of a odd man out kind of feeling. If you own a stock in a company, you're kind of second rate compared to the management. They don't always tell you the truth, and they're manipulating you. But if you think the company's really doing something for the stakeholders, for the shareholders, for the customers, and for themselves, you feel a lot better about it. So I'd feel better as an investor if I invested in a company like that. And so better, faster, cheaper, and for and not to the customer, and to the delight of the customer, and be on a scale that if it works in. Another thing in the advertising, I did this WPP group I told you about where Martin Sorrell just left. He got fired, but he said that the word globalization is a misnomer. That the better word is Americanization. People all over the world really want to live the way we do here. I don't know whether you believe that. I think there's something to it. Yeah. And so if it's a success here, it can be a success elsewhere. And that's certainly been the case of Airlines. It's been of Starbucks. It's Amazon. All these companies operate throughout the world, and you used to talk about the law of large numbers. Well, hell, you need to own a stock that has a large number because there are a large number of people in the world and a large number of square miles to cover, and you got to get out there before someone beats you to it. I think these big companies have a huge advantage now. Rather than being cumbersome oafs like they used to be, they're really big and strong and powerful, and they just win.
Right. So following up on that, Shad, recently I think you wrote about the necessity of large numbers.
Yeah.
Right. Not that large numbers are not just needed to compete, but to actually succeed.
Right.
Right. So can you talk to us a little bit about that? Why do you think large numbers are a necessity? And maybe give us an example of a company that you think has efficiency going for it.
Can't talk about Google, can we? I'm teasing. Well, all of them really. Southwest Airlines now is going to Mexico. They're going to the Caribbean. They're big enough to do it. And no one would sit aside and let Southwest do to them what they did. I mean, Southwest, it couldn't happen again because people are just smarter. I think that the board compositions have changed. I think that people are more attentive, and the kind of dull, kind of half senile chief executive officer who sits there and acts like a dictator, they're over. And women on the boards have helped, I think. And there's just more visibility. It's hard to be as secretive as people used to be.
Right.
So I think the governance is better, and I think the opportunities are better perceived, and investors aren't any smarter. And but I think that the whole investment situation has improved.
And I think you've also stressed on efficiency, right, Shad? And you say like Costco is not just efficient but elegant.
Oh yeah, it's great. It's fun to be there, fun to shop there. You save money, you get great products, you get great value. You see the same people there, and I think the shopping is sort of an adventure and kind of fun. And they put things in the store just to get you back.
How did you approach Costco as an investment decision? Did you?
Well, I like going there.
Okay.
It's probably as simple as that. I thought if I like it, other people probably like it, and they do.
Right.
If you want to save money, you want to get good value, you don't care about the brand name. I mean, the brand, what is it, Kindle, what is it? It's a great stuff.
The Kirkland.
Yeah, Kirkland.
Yeah.
And well, I'm losing my mind here, but yeah, it's really good. I like everything about it. One time I was in this investment group, and the deal on the dinner we were going to was that the person who had the worst bottle of wine had to buy dinner. Okay. And so I went and I took a bottle of wine that my wife had picked out from Constellation Brands. I can't remember the name of it, but it was a 92 on the Wine Observer board or something. And anyway, I heard the waitress complaining, said, "This wine is flawed. The cork is no good." And he didn't wrap it up in tinfoil, so I know what it is. I said, "All right, I give up. It's me. I'll buy dinner." Right. Then I wrote a letter to Jim Sinegal saying that I had this horrible experience, and golly, they dropped it. Constellation Brands sent me a gift certificate. Costco gave me my money back. I just made a huge profit on it, and bought more stock. And I did the same thing to McDonald's and talked about something terrible that happened there, and I got a form letter back. Sorry for your bad experience, and it's nothing. But that's the sort of heroic response. It's going overboard, bending over backwards to make people happy. And it's if the customer comes first, you get ahead, and if it doesn't, you get behind.
Right. So I think when you said customer comes first, I'm reminded of another one of your nice characterizations about stage 1 companies, stage 2 companies, and stage 3 companies. And these aren't to do with size of the company or age of the company. They're with how the company interacts.
How they act.
Customer.
In stage one, everything's new. You're doing something better, faster, cheaper for the customer. Your stock is soaring.
Can you give us examples of each stage?
Well, any little company that takes off. Southwest Airlines has been kind of stage one the whole career it's had. But stage two is maybe like a Starbucks where they start selling tea and different food and trying to mix up trying to get more money from the same person.
Okay.
And stage three is most airlines and banks and everything else, where there's no question they're out to get you.
So how do you detect this change between stage 2 and stage 3, Shad?
Well, I'm a customer, just like you are. It's obvious, isn't it? That's what I think.
So what are the hallmarks, Shad, of a great business? Like the stage 2, stage 1 kind of business. What are the hallmarks?
Well, I would love to find a business that was doing something better, faster, cheaper.
Okay.
On a scale that could be taken globally, that I'd seen it work in the United States. They had great management. I don't know how you define that, but you know it when you see it. And some valuation that was, somehow you could think was reasonable.
Right.
And it sounded like I was laughing the other day about that David Allen Coe song. What was it? I think your song's perfect, but you haven't said anything about mama or trains or being drunk or falling off the bus but there's all the ingredients are there for perfect, just like the ingredients are there for perfect stock. And you're always looking for the perfect stock.
Do you focus on capital intensity at all when you look at a great company? Or?
Capital what?
Capital intensiveness. How they use their balance sheet. Are those things you look at?
Well, I look at it, but I presume they know more than I do, so I'm not too judgmental about it.
Okay. So let's invert that a little bit. Like Carl Jacobi and Charlie Munger.
Yeah.
So what are some things you want to avoid in a business?
Well, if you were still too short, I'd want the same thing. It's not doing something better, faster, cheaper. It's doing something worse that irritates people.
Okay.
They don't like it, and business is going down, and it has no potential overseas because it has no potential in the United States. And you inverted it, it'd be a perfect inversion.
Are there industries or sectors that you would avoid?
Well, I don't think that way. I think the ones that I would be attracted to.
Okay.
And clearly, technology is an area. Home building is kind of interesting because all the millennials living at home and their parents are getting tired of them. And I think they'll buy houses at some point.
Technology and home building are sectors.
Yeah, just making the modern home, the smart home.
Right.
And so I know this guy that runs Pulte.
Pulte Group, yes.
Yeah, and then I don't think it matters too much, but they're all going to have it. Where the technology finally brought the house to bring the house into the modern age.
If I can continue on, another Charlie Mungerism, we learn more from our mistakes than from our successes.
So, I don't know a lot then.
So after short selling, once you move to being a long-only consumer-focused investor, what are one or two mistakes you've made that you want to talk about?
One of them, I don't want to talk about it. and the smaller companies, there's a company in Dallas called Employers Casualty Insurance Company that did workers' compensation, and it was a cheap stock, and it always been a great company and had a great balance sheet, and the management wouldn't talk to me. And I presume that meant that it was so good they didn't want to share the information. And so I bought it, and they wouldn't return the phone call, and it went broke. That's a bad example, or a good example of that.
Okay.
Another one, I had some success with Southwest Airlines several times, and I got very interested in Greyhound buses. And even my wife said, "What are you thinking about? No one rides a bus," and you couldn't see that no one was on the buses because the windows are tinted. So that was a painful one.
So you probably picked up a lot of trading techniques as a short seller, looking at price, volume, maybe margin calls, technicals.
No, I didn't learn anything.
Do you look at anything other than the customer experience and fundamentals when you invest in a business?
Well, it's nice if the stock is off for the wrong reason.
Okay.
That's always a good one. They're panicked about something they shouldn't. The shareholders are panicked over something they shouldn't be panicked over. That's a good reason to do it. You get a better bargain that way. But I think in the long term, it doesn't make that much difference when you buy it if you buy the right company.
So let's focus on that a little bit. The valuation, right? How do you approach valuation once you identify a great business? What is an upper bound you're willing to pay? How do you arrive at that?
Well, I'd want to see how you could pay 10 times what you thought it was eventually going to earn. That would be okay with me. If you had a pretty high degree of confidence in it. Because with interest rates where they are, you've got to think what you're going to do with your money. And if people say, well, the market's very overpriced and the NASDAQ sells at 33 times earnings or whatever it sells at, well, you know, what's the yield on a 10-year government? 3%. That's 33 times earnings, and that's the most they're going to earn.
Okay.
So the companies have a chance to earn a lot more. So I think stocks are probably cheap relative to your choices of what you can do with the money. Real estate isn't any better. Farming, well, I don't know what you're going to do. But your choices are limited. You know, stock is, you know, it's people, it's real estate, it's capital, it's machines, it's everything put together by smart people and working and creating value and growing. Pretty exciting. It doesn't excite people very much now, but it will. They haven't thought it through.
So once you buy a stock, ideally, Shad, you never want to sell it. You write, you know, fairly well that selling creates two problems, right?
Right.
The tax problem and the problem.
Yeah, you pay taxes, then you got to replace the investment.
Right.
You got to be right twice.
Right.
All you got to do on a real growth stock is be right once.
So, but sometimes you still have to sell, Shad.
Sure.
And do you sell because the situation changes, or do you sell also sometimes because the price runs up too much? How do you think?
Well, I've done that, a little bit of that. You know, this WPP group, which I bought years ago, I sold some in 2000 or something. It was like a crazy price and didn't get it all sold, but I kept it. And then, you know, I knew Martin Sorrell and watched him, but then I watched other companies come along like you know, this one. And, you know, it was putting them out, hurting their business very badly. So I eventually sold it. And it made good sales too. That would be a reason, you know, if the business is fundamentally changed by technology or by something that they haven't done. That would be the reason to sell it, or the management's bad, or you know, something changed that, you know, you could see, but not because it didn't show relative strength or something crazy like that.
Shad, if we can shift gears a little bit. You've spoken about the need for pension funds to be simple in the investing process, right? And recently there have been incidents of funds that have invested in exotic foreign agriculture and things that didn't work out well. Why do you think this happens? And what can be done to improve this?
You know, if you'll think of yourself as a stock, I think it helps. You know, you have more money coming in than going out, hopefully. And you're all in here to buy stocks, and your estate grows, and you get a better job, or you don't get a better job, but you're spending less than you're saving, and you grow up and you're going to be a rich old guy or girl or whatever. And that's the way it works. And these pension funds have more money going out than coming in. And compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world, but when it's working against you, you can't beat it. That's what's happening in these pension funds. They promise more than they can deliver, and so they're you know, saying they're making money, or they're only 75% funded or something like that, but really they're going to go broke. And you can be an alarmist about it. And I got fired as I was the chairman of the Texas Pension Review Board for 12 years or something. And you know, Governor Perry finally fired me. Got tired of hearing me. But you know, compound interest is a wonderful thing to have on your side, and a terrible thing to have working against you.
Do you think that's likely to change in the coming years, the way?
Oh, well, sure, it'll change. Like the sun will come up in the west or the east or wherever it does. You know, no, they're immutable laws. Well, it isn't going to change. Behavior isn't going to change. People get a hold of other people's money and they like it. It gives them power and they want to be smart.
So, Shad, one of the books I think that have really influenced you has been Money Masters by John Crane.
Yeah.
What about the book influenced you? Another?
Well, he's a good money manager, and He understood the distinctions that investors were making in their minds. It's just a good survey, and nothing's changed since then. No one had ever studied investment managers before. They were just kind of like clerks or something, but then they became kind of larger than life sometimes, and it became interesting to people. But the thing I found interesting, he's very thoughtful, and one time I said, after studying all these people, value investors and all this, how did you become a growth stock manager like T. Rowe Price? And he said that value investors are really kind of glorified accountants. They're looking at the gap between their perceived value of what the assets of the company are worth and its market capitalization, and trying to close the difference. And then when they do it, they got to go buy something else. So it's a constant turnover process. And if you ever make a mistake, you pay a lot of taxes and you've lost all your money. But a growth stock investor, which he said that suited his nature. You're really kind of a futurologist, and looking in the future and trying to figure out what's going to happen. He said that suited his nature, so that's what he did. That makes perfect sense to me. It requires fewer people, and you just have to be right a couple of times in your life.
When we were speaking earlier with one of your colleagues, Trey, you spoke about the spectrum of investors: short sellers, activists, long-only investors. Do you want to share that with?
Oh, I was saying that short sellers really think they're the smartest people on earth. Right. They're much smarter than these managements, and they're so smart that they risk their whole stash to prove they're right, and they go broke or have nervous breakdowns or shoot themselves. I mean, I had a good friend who killed himself, but it's a terrible life. And then the next ones are activist investors. Activists think that they're smarter than management too. They're going to tell them how to do it. And so they just get in there and start saying, do this, do that. And we want to sell the company and want to make these fees. And then
the value investors.
And then the value investors I've already talked about. But you can rank them all. And then the growth stock investors just think, this company is smarter than I am. They know the business better than I do. Plus it's a great business, and then I'll get out of it. So that's how you have a slight advantage there. You want to put yourself on the side where you have an advantage where they don't. So if you perceive that there's a long-term future for the business, they're doing something better, faster, cheaper, and for the customer, you can buy it at a reasonable price. And if you're wrong, you can sell it. That's a pretty good deal. And that's one I think I want to take.
So Shad, I guess I want to get a little personal with this question for you. So around 2 decades ago, you were diagnosed with Parkinson's.
Yeah.
Shortly after which you considered shutting down your fund.
Yeah.
Right. But then you chose not to shut it down. Maybe you should walk us through that. And also after that, you've stated that having Parkinson's has actually made you a better person. Can you talk to us why you feel?
Well, Michael J. Fox, I'm on his board. He calls Parkinson's a gift that keeps on taking. But I think it makes you a little humble and more appreciative of what you did have going right. You have to make adjustments to it. But my first reaction was, what the hell is going on here? And I thought, well, I'll do everybody a favor and shut the fund down. And I gave a lot of the money back. I had some stocks that were hard to get out. They were illiquid. And so I dragged my feet and then decided, what else am I going to do? So I changed my mind, and I've had a good record ever since. But I had a good record the whole time. But yeah, it changes your life a little bit, and you appreciate the things that go your way and things that don't. You don't worry as much about. Which isn't to say I've got a completely pleasant personality. It's not. And but I think investing is a matter of finding out who you are and where you fit in the world and how it all fits together. I don't know who's saying it is, but you don't know who you are. The stock market's an expensive place to find out. Is true. But if you fit your nature with your investment style and it makes economic sense, you probably do pretty well. If you think of yourself as a stock where you have more coming in than going out, and so you're doing something with the money, in other words, you're managing your cash flow, you're going to end up being a rich old guy or girl or whatever. And that makes sense to me. So I feel like I've got the game is going my way, and I feel like that's the way anybody who thought about it should go. And you listen to the television, the stock's under accumulation, it's breaking out, it's breaking down, it's lacking support. I'm selling, buy, sell. Just pay a lot of commissions, and and dealer spreads and lose your money and talk more.
So Shad, before we open it up to the audience for questions, I want to ask you one question that we ask all our guests. What is some advice you would give the personal investor, someone who's starting their journey today, maybe investing their first few dollars and trying to make compounding work for them?
I'd say the same thing. Just who are you? What do you like? Are you a cheerleader or are you a booer? You want the home team to win or you want the home team to lose. Pick companies you like. You like the management. You think they have a bright future. You like dealing with them. You think they're good people, and just sit on it and own it, and think of yourself as a partial owner of a business, just like you're the owner of your entire business, which is your life. So that's kind of Warren Buffett 101, and combined with a little pop psychology and my experience, and that's what I would do. That's what I'm trying to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no. Thank you, Shad. Thank you so much for
it's fun being here.
that. I think we'll open it up to audience questions, and I have a few more in case we have time at the end of the audience questions. Yeah.
Thank you for your talk. That's very inspiring. So I have a question about the large number is a necessity. I was wondering if you think there's the risk of the antitrust once the company goes large, and the large number goes beyond such.
Sure, there's a terrifying aspect of it. But usually the litigation starts coming when they're trying to use the government to protect themselves from competition or something. So I don't know. It'll be interesting. I watched that other company the other day talking on the television about its issues and problems. But I think that these congressmen and these state legislators, they're so busy that they don't have time to understand anything very clearly. And if the business is still good, it'll probably survive and do fine. And ultimately they have constituencies that people vote, and so I don't worry about it too much. I'm worried about it some, but not too much. I think it's overrated. Does that make sense? That answers your question?
Yeah, it makes sense. Thanks.
You talked about better, faster, cheaper. What is one business that's better, faster, cheaper that you would like to own but you don't because of price or whatever other reason? And I have a second part question.
I don't have any of those. I bought them.
What is something that you owned in the past that is no longer better, faster, cheaper, and why?
Well, let's see. I own McDonald's, and they're getting beaten by lots of people now. And I own PetSmart, which started selling very expensive products. So you save money, it puts your dog up. You could do warehouse stores and build them down and had more functions in them. But it was not as good a company at what they could do to the dog or do to you, or how they could trick you. And but really, I'm just trying to find the ones that are good and hold them. I sold WPP, which I owned one. I made 33 times on my money, and the reason was that the competitors, online competitors, were doing it better, faster, cheaper, and getting more for the money. And you watch regular television now, and the ads on it for drugs that, the side effects might be that you'll die crying for your mother. They're just terrible, off-putting. And so an ad that applies to you directly, that you only see, that's structured to tell you something that you want to hear, it seems like a better deal to me.
I think you had also written about CarMax, which back in the day was excellent pricing, right? But with discoverability now.
Yeah, the advantage is gone. Because everybody knows what everybody paid for everything.
Because of the internet and
Sure.
Kelly Blue Book. Yeah.
So one last question. We had Mr. Schwab visit us, I think, about 2 years ago from Charles Schwab.
Oh, good.
And he talked about how, in his words, Charles Schwab continues to deliver their services to their customers better, faster, cheaper. How do you think about Charles Schwab, say, compared to, say, T. Rowe, which you do own?
Compared to T. Rowe?
T. Rowe, yeah.
I got a good price on T. Rowe. I'm ready to get out of it, but
Do you think Charles Schwab does better, faster, cheaper? You are in that industry, so probably you know better about who does.
well, I think that right now the T. Rowe Price probably does better because they're focused on growth companies, and the market isn't paying the premium that it's certainly capable of paying for those companies. You know, I can remember I was not in the market at that time, but the Nifty 50, you know, were induplicable companies that would always be in people's portfolios regardless and always grow. And they all sold at 100 times earnings, 1973. So I think that sort of thing could happen again. Maybe have a World Nifty 50. Where you know, you talk about Bitcoin. Well, hell, the Coca-Cola stock used to be like Bitcoin. Or the technology companies are like that. I think that could easily happen. And I think that these companies can make the acquisition. You know, they know more about other businesses than I do, and they can buy them for stock or buy them for cash. And everybody turns into a Warren Buffett kind of. I mean, what do we learn from Warren Buffett? I mean, yeah, he started out with, you know, selling, you know, delivering papers and turned that into becoming the richest guy in the world for a while. And what did he do? He just had an obsession with money and never spent it and just compounded.
I always wonder about non-profit investments, and when I think of Buffett or Gates and a lot of philanthropic investments, you know, is it in the context of philanthropy versus giving away versus actual investment and being able to manage it? And I always wonder what the thought process is when the rich decide to go one way or the other. And I'm just curious to hear your thoughts.
On accumulating money?
Philanthropy or, you know, investment and change in the context of larger good. How do investors think about it?
I think about it all the time, and I don't. Sometimes I'm usually disappointed by what I discover about what's really happening. I mean, you know, people get old and they want to have hospitals named after them. They want to invest in healthcare, and the healthcare people are just charging more every year, and it's become too big a burden. Not to complain about it, but yeah, I think it's an issue. You don't want to die with all your money, and you'd rather have you decide what to do with it than have someone else decide what to do with it. Certainly anyone's going to do better than the government, probably. But I think it's a big issue. We don't live forever, because we all think we will. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I wonder what's your advice about risk controlling for personal investors who don't have much time to investigate what's going on in the market?
Well, you'd beat 90% of the investors if you just bought the S&P 500 index from Vanguard or Fidelity or something like that. That's what most people ought to do. And they wouldn't worry about the individual stocks. Or, you know, you put 90% of your money in those index funds and then play with the other money just like you play money and have fun with it. That'd be my advice.
I really enjoy your sort of three-stage model on how companies sort of get fat and then get lazy and then, you know, get eaten.
Yeah.
One question I have is, you know, how frequently do companies that you've purchased, you know, turn into a different stage? Or obviously you're trying to buy ones that always stay in stage one and
that's very
worst
hard
case
to do.
End up in stage two, but
because they're successful in stage one, that leads to problems.
Mm-hmm.
Just like with people, it's just like exactly like a person.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, at some point, having, you know, the company is successful and it wants to do something else, and the individual wants to do something else that didn't make him the money in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And this is exactly the same thing. So you want to make enough money so that you're comfortable and you get your needs taken care of, but that's enough probably, unless it becomes a game or an obsession. But you're right, exactly. It's the same thing as with a person.
Can I ask a brief follow-up, which is in a profile of you from 2016, you mentioned that you aim to have about 15 stocks in your portfolio at any given time, and you sort of sell off the worst performing one every year and try to replace it.
Yeah.
And that incidentally, you also mentioned that by concentration, only about 6 of them make up about 70% of the actual portfolio by value. Is that a fairly constant sort of performance metric?
Well, this is what happens. This is what happened to me, but I'd like to. I'm probably about 12 or 13 stocks, and most of them are. And most of the money's in very few stocks, but you want to be diversified to the point that you've got the odds in your favor, but not to the point that you don't keep up with them. And if I'm being a little bit more disciplined about it than I used to be, but it's hard to sell a stock once you have a profit in it. It's hard to sell it, pay the taxes, make up the net worth, and pay the dealer spread and make the money back. So what you tend to do is own some mediocre companies at low cost. But if you want to step out, you got to sell them, and they got to fit what you really think is happening. I mean, I was saying the same thing 10 years ago, but my portfolio has completely turned over since then, and the reason is I have better companies now. I think, knock wood.
As companies grow, the culture is very difficult to maintain, right?
What is?
Especially when bureaucracy creeps in. What made you believe that Southwest will continue continue keeping its culture in future?
Its culture? Well, they've got a good guy, Gary Kelly, now, who's running it. They've always had good chief executive officers, but it's hard to change a culture it's hard to change it for the worse. It's hard to change it for the better. And I like to pick on American Airlines, but it just seems like they invariably do the exact thing that I don't want them to do. Like changing a reservation. Southwest, they let you change your time. American Airlines, you have to buy another ticket by the time they tag their penalties and everything else on you. It was stupid. I don't understand it. And so who's your fidelity owed to? It's owed to your customer and to the shareholders. You got stakeholders in any business, and you got to treat them right. And a lot of times these professional managements get hold of these companies and they think they're the ones to be served. They need to serve themselves first, and everybody can see that, and they react against it, and they don't share in the business, and they go on, which is fine, I guess. The management makes plenty of money, but they could have made more and had more fun and contributed to society rather than not.
If I may ask another question, I understand that for short seller it's hard also because of you not only need to get your thesis right, you also need to get your timing right.
Right.
As a value investor, I guess you're not supposed to time the market, and we know it's very hard. But I keep wondering because, for example, right now we are in a late cycle, late part of the cycle. I wonder, being understanding we should not timing the market, wonder if there's a strategy you would think an investor would deal slightly differently than the beginning of the cycle. I don't know. It's kind of a.
I'm glad to know that we're at the end of the cycle. I found that out from you. I don't know that we are at all. I don't have any idea. I think that from the time I've been in the business, the general public's attitude is much less interested in the stock market. And there are fewer shares, there are fewer companies that are public. But they're better companies now. They're better run, and it's just as competitive. But they make more money. The profitability's higher. I think stocks are a heck of a deal relative to what else you can do with your money. And you get a few of those other things right. The better, faster, cheaper, and for the customer, and to the delight of the customer, and works in the United States. It can be taken internationally. I don't see how you miss. And when you find them, I hope you'll call me and tell me about it.
All right. I think we're out of time. Thank you so much, Shad, for coming and speaking with us. I think we should all really enjoy it.